Josh Frydenberg, welcome to the program.
Nice to be with you, David.
Let me begin by quoting from your first speech to Parliament. You said, "My goal is to ensure that government learns to live within its means." Treasurer, when will those lessons begin again?
Well, look, we're doing everything we can to ensure that Australia gets to the other side of this crisis. Context is critical, David. Australia's been hit by the greatest economic shock since the Great Depression. We have seen Treasury fear that unemployment could reach as high as 15%. That's more than 2 million Australians unemployed. GDP could fall by more than 20%.
Didn't happen, though.
It didn't happen because we responded with an unprecedented amount of economic support, more than twice what the states and territories committed combined.
I guess I'm asking more about where we are now. You tell us that the economy's roaring back to life, and yet in 10 years from now, you're still projecting the deficit, the budget will still be structurally in deficit by more than 1%.
Well, this budget, compared to last year's budget just last October, shows that net debt to GDP, which is a sign of fiscal sustainability, comes down each and every year. The deficits have come down by 2/3 over the course of the forward estimates. And when you look at other countries with a AAA credit rating from the 3 leading agencies, there are 9 of them. Australia is one of them. And actually, our fiscal consolidation over the next 6 years is happening faster than those other countries. And let's not forget, Australia has avoided the fate of other nations. We have seen unemployment come down to 5.6% today. Remarkably, that's even lower than when we came to government. And we have prevented a generation of Australians becoming long-term unemployed. And we've seen Australia recover from this recession 5 times faster than the experience during the 1990s recession.
That's true, but I'm just asking about what you're doing now in this budget for the years ahead. Is there any plan for a surplus?
Well, we don't print a surplus number over the decade.
Do you have any plan for a surplus?
Well, we're always striving to balance the books, and we did it before and we'll do it again.
So where are you striving to... Where's this plan to balance? It's not there in the next 10 years.
Of the new spending, about half of it is temporary. So that's doing what is working to date, extending the lower middle income tax offsets, which are going to support more than 10 million Australian families with a tax cut. If you earn between $48,000 and $90,000, you'll get an extra $1,080
So
in your
half
pocket.
the spending's baked in, is that the point?
Well, half of the spending is around long-term commitments on aged care, on disability support, on mental health, women's safety, all important issues, David, that you would agree a government needs to meet. And when people come to looking at this budget in more detail, they will see how not only are we building the bridge to the other side of this crisis and getting more Australians in work, because this is our jobs plan, but we're also seeking to secure the economic recovery because the international environment is so uncertain with so many new COVID cases around the world, and of course Europe has just gone into a double-dip recession.
Will you cut spending after the election?
Again, we are focused on the here and now. We've always sought to fund appropriately the things that need it most.
So does that mean you'll cut spending after the next election?
Well, again, we're not seeking to cut spending after the next election. What we're seeking to do
What does that mean? You will or you won't?
Well, our plans are in the budget. It's very clear what's in the budget.
So no spending cuts after the election?
So what you can see in the budget is record spending on hospitals, record spending on schools, record spending on disability support. Indeed, under a coalition government, the NDIS will always be fully funded.
So you
record
won't cut
spending on mental health.
You won't cut spending after the election?
Well, our plans are in the budget that was just on Tuesday night, and you can see that we increased spending to guarantee those essential services, but we also did so in a way that is consistent with Liberal values, whether it's with regard to supporting the private sector with business investment incentives that will help support around $320 billion of investment, whether it's backing families by cutting their taxes, rewarding effort, or indeed whether it's encouraging personal responsibility, supporting retirees, supporting stronger regions, supporting home ownership, which is totemic, and to the Liberal Party philosophy.
Let's talk about tax. When you announced the stage 3 tax cuts for higher income earners a couple of years ago, you said they were affordable because the government, quote, will continue to deliver budget surpluses. How are they still affordable when you're now using borrowed money to pay for them?
Well, they're legislated tax cuts. They're actually in the budget numbers, and they do create a stronger and a fairer system. That's really important.
Before we get to the equity of the tax cuts, they are using borrowed money. I'm asking about the affordability. Are they still affordable?
Well, again, they're rewarding Australians in work, and it's returning more of their money. That's our approach. The Australian people
Borrowed
vote.
money.
The
How is it affordable
Dave,
when you're going to be $57 billion in deficit the year they come in?
Well, David, again, it creates a stronger and a fairer system. 95% of Australians will pay a marginal rate of tax of no more than 30 cents in the dollar. We took this policy to the last election.
Yeah, but the world's
and
changed
then we
since the last
legislated.
election, Treasurer, as you keep telling us.
But these are important reforms. And what is also important is it maintains the progressive nature of our tax system. So the top 1% of taxpayers will be paying about 17% of the tax burden. The top 5% of taxpayers will be paid a third of the tax burden. The top 20% of taxpayers will about 60% of the tax burden.
So these figures you use about the fairness based on, before the last election when you announced all this, can I ask you about the fairness of them now? When the low and middle income tax offset ends, which it will, someone earning $45,000 a year is going to be $855 a year worse off than they are today. Someone on 60 grand is going to be about $700 a year worse off than they are today. Someone earning $80,000 will be about $200 worse off than they are today. Everyone earning more than 200 grand will be $9,000 better off under your tax cuts. Is that correct?
Well, if Anthony Albanese abolishes these tax cuts...
No, I'm not asking about Labor, Treasurer.
But again,
I'm asking about your tax
legislative.
cuts. Is that correct?
Well, the point is that someone on $80,000 will be better off, someone on $90,000 will be better off, someone on $100,000...
How will they be better off than they are today? Is what you've just said correct?
Absolutely.
How will they be better off?
So if you don't go forward with stage 3 of the tax cuts, someone on $80,000 will be $900 worse off. Someone on $90,000 will be $1,120 worse off. Someone on $100,000 will be $1,370 worse off. The key point is, and this is really important, David, you mentioned someone on $45,000. When stage 3 of the tax cuts is locked in, they will then be better off by $1,080 compared to what they would have been in back in 17-18 before the tax plan.
I'm asking about this year.
Yeah.
They're getting the low and middle income tax offset.
But that is not a permanent feature of the tax system.
That ends.
That's the point.
So all these people under 80 grand are going to be worse off.
No, they're not. And the key point here, David, is we are making a structural reform. We're getting rid of a whole 37 cents in the dollar tax bracket. That's really important to understand. The low and middle income tax offset is temporary. We extended it last year, we extended it this year. It's not a permanent feature of the tax system.
But compared to this year, once that goes, compared to where they are right now, are people on average wages below 80 grand worse off or better off in 3 years' time?
Well, again, that's a temporary initiative.
So they're
this
worse
is
off.
This is a permanent feature of the tax system. Now, you raise with me people on higher incomes.
No, I just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
If you're earning less than $80,000 a year right now, you're getting the low and middle income tax offset. That ends. Where are you left? Worse off or better off?
You are better off on the stage 3 of our tax plan, stage 2, stage 1, all compared back to 2017-18 when they didn't.
Compared to this year, Treasurer, are you going to be worse off?
But you're not comparing it. You're not comparing an apple and an orange.
No,
you're comparing a.
With respect, I am. I'm asking you.
No, you're not.
Well, for someone today, right, what tax they're paying today, they're going to be paying more in 3 years' time.
So the low and middle income tax offset, which you were referring, has been extended for a year. We've used it as a stimulus measure. It's not a permanent feature of the tax system.
Right.
What is a permanent feature of the tax system is what is legislated through the parliament.
But compared to what's in their wallet today and what's going to be in their wallet in 3 years' time, they're going to be worse off.
No, they're not. And can I also point out to you, because you did raise with me people on higher incomes, if you're on $200,000, you're earning 4 times as much as someone on $50,000. Yet someone on $200,000 is paying many more times as a multiple the amount of tax that someone on $45,000 is. That's paying actually 8 times.
And what's the bang for the buck for the economy here? What's the economic growth that we get from these stage 3 tax cuts?
What you're doing is you're rewarding effort, you're encouraging aspiration, you're returning more of people's hard-earned money back to them.
So what's the growth dividend for the economy?
Well, again, they're baked in. So you've seen in our numbers today, or from Tuesday, you've seen how the economy continues to grow.
I couldn't find the growth dividend. Is there a growth? What's the growth that we get from the stage 3 tax cuts in the budget?
Well, again, you see economic growth going through the years in our budget, including this year.
But from these tax cuts, $130 billion of tax cuts, what growth do they deliver?
They deliver a stronger economy over time.
To what degree?
Well, I just pointed out to you, compared to the budget that we announced just in last October, you've seen an improvement in our net debt to GDP over each and every year.
But I must about this
over the
measure.
medium term. And
surely you've had a look
in.
at whether there's any growth from these stage 3 tax cuts.
The economy is still continuing to grow,
No, but
David.
I'm asking about the tax cuts.
Yeah, and
a
they're
lot of
baked
money
in.
we're paying for this.
That's right.
What growth do we get?
Well, we get a stronger economy, a fairer tax system, reward for effort, and it encourages aspiration.
But you don't know how much growth we get from these tax cuts.
The growth numbers are baked in to the budget based on the legislated tax cuts.
Okay.
We're talking about, we took these tax cuts to the Australian people at the last election. They were either voting for Labor's $387 million higher taxes.
A lot's
or
changed
us.
since 2019. A pandemic's come along.
But I tell you what hasn't changed, David, our commitment to lower taxes.
Okay, let me ask you about wages.
Please.
In the next couple of years, before we get to when these tax cuts come in, you are forecasting wages to actually fall in real terms. Why isn't there a plan to boost wages?
Well, firstly, inflation is above wages this year.
And next year.
But that is because last year we saw the steepest quarterly fall in the consumer price index since 1931, off the back of free childcare, lower petrol prices and lower rents. That's the reason. And what we do see is that wages continue to grow. They grow from 1.5 to 2.25 to 2.5 to 2.75. So by the end of the forward estimates, they're above inflation.
But the next couple of years, you'll be going backwards.
But the key, David, to driving increased real wages is actually to get a tighter labour market. That's why you've seen in these budget papers that the unemployment rate comes below 5% by the end of next year. We had a brief period where the unemployment rate was below 5 between 2006 and 2008. Then you have to go back all the way to the 1970s. So by driving down unemployment, which our jobs plan does.
In the meantime, though, the Fair
what it
Work
does.
Commission is currently considering a lift in the minimum wage. You made a submission. Why didn't you say you support a wage rise?
Well, the government has always been consistent with respect to leaving it to the Fair Work Commission to make those decisions. What we did do...
You could say we want to see a wage rise.
What we did do is we pointed out the strengthening Australian economy, and we'll leave it to the Fair Work Commission to make that decision. That's been a consistent approach of our government.
Why aren't you at least doing something to boost the wages of aged care workers, as was recommended by the Royal Commission? Don't they deserve a wage rise?
Well, the care workforce are going through right now a Fair Work Commission hearing, obviously seeking a significant boost to their pay. We'll let that work its way through. But what I can say...
The Royal Commission said you should do more than that. Recommendation 84. The government should collaborate with unions and employers in aged care to increase wages. Why don't you do that?
The Royal Commission also says we should put a tax on all Australians to pay for aged care.
So the Royal Commission don't know what they're talking about?
No, we accepted the vast bulk of the Royal Commission
Not this
recommendations.
one on wages.
But on that one, we've stayed true to our consistent position with respect to wages. But what we did do with respect to the workforce is we put 33,000 new positions for the care workforce through our job trainer program, because that's a huge issue. But if you want to talk about aged care, we've given the biggest boost to aged care funding of $17.7 billion, 80,000 new home care places. That will reach 275,000 new places compared to just 60,000
Just the poor old aged care workers who aren't getting a wage increase
Well,
yet.
what I said, we're focusing on training. If you're working with dementia patients, we're going to give you extra training. There's a whole series of initiatives around the workforce.
On borders, you said last year, closed borders cost jobs. Why isn't there a plan to reopen the international border?
Well, again, we've taken a cautious assumption based on the medical advice that it will gradually open from the middle of next year. Now, the situation's very fluid. You've seen 800,000 plus cases a day, new variants of the virus, and we've also seen how damaging new cases and outbreaks here in Australia can be, not just to the economic recovery, but obviously to lives and
Some of your
livelihoods
colleagues
as well.
are a bit anxious about this, though, aren't they? They'd like to see a reopening sooner.
Well, again, we're going to follow the medical advice that served us very well through this crisis. Don't forget the Prime Minister acted very quickly, ahead of the rest of the world, to close our international borders, at the time starting with China and then more broadly. He was criticised for it, but the net result has been that Australia has been a lot more safe as a result.
Why isn't there a plan to seriously expand quarantine capacity in the meantime? Surely that's a no-brainer.
Well, we're just spending $500 million on expanding Howard Springs to 2,000 people. Quarantine has worked effectively. More than 300,000 people have come in through the quarantine process. That's involved isolating about 3,000 COVID cases. Victoria has a proposal that we're giving due consideration for, a designated facility between 500 and 2,000 beds. Happy to talk to the states, but the quarantine facility that we have been funding through Howard Springs, based on the Holton Review recommendations, has been upgraded.
The universities are pretty keen to bring in foreign students. Some of the states are pretty keen to as well. Is there going to be movement on that soon?
Well, we've encouraged the states to talk to the university sector to get the approval of the Chief Medical Officer, and if they want to put a proposal which will see more international students coming, then it has to be over and above their existing caps. And we will look favourably at those proposals, but importantly, they have to be ticked off by the Chief Medical Officer. Gladys Berejiklian and Stephen Marshall, they've also already raised these issues with the Prime Minister, and we're certainly interested in them.
Okay, so the New South Wales and South Australian premiers have spoken to the Prime Minister about this. They put proposals.
The formal proposals are kind of be coming in due course.
Okay.
But let's not forget, at the end of last year, we saw a small cohort of students come through for Charles Darwin University from Japan, from Vietnam, from Hong Kong. It was a small number of students. If more students are going to come, it does need to be ticked off by the Chief Medical Officer.
You said the government will look favourably at this.
We are favourably disposed,
right.
And in the budget we said that we could see small numbers of international students coming from the end of this year.
Okay, well, just finally on universities, because it's not just the foreign students issue, their revenues are hurting many of them. And again, let me finish with another quote from your first speech to Parliament, Treasurer. You said on university funding, to underfund these institutions is self-defeating because the harvest of intellectual property generated by them can be the source of our prosperity and the knowledge economy of the future. It's a good speech.
You've been reading closely that speech. I also did say that Thomas Jefferson said education is the first defence of the nation, and I firmly believe that.
Yeah, and yet overall spending on universities in your budget is declining in real terms.
No, we put in place $19 billion in this budget to guarantee the domestic enrolments for universities. In last year's budget, last October, I announced an additional $1 billion for research funding, and as a result of measures we've taken through the pandemic, there are 30,000 new university places. I think universities are critical to Australia's economic prosperity, to our cultural harmony, and of course to a better society. One of the initiatives I did put in the budget was for a patent box on the tax system to ensure that our biotech and medical companies that are so closely interlinked with our universities could work more closely together, creating more jobs within our university system and in our biotech industry.
Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure.